Hello and welcome to the British Council ELTons Festival of Innovation 2024. My name is Chia Chong and you're attending the very first ever session of the ELTons Festival. But what are the ELTons? Many say that the ELTons are the Oscars of our industry, a chance to celebrate those that push for innovation to help solve problems and deal with current issues of our world. This year, the ELTons take on a brand new format, trying to be more accessible and relevant to the people from all around the world like yourselves, reaching educators, publishers, writers, learners, parents, education managers and policymakers from all over the world. Today, in our very, very first session, we will be seeing some lightning talks from some fabulous speakers. We've got Jane Chikapa, Andrew Boon, and Rachael Harris, and we'll be talking about how to empower learner autonomy and confidence in this session. Many of you are joining us on Zoom events, and we would like the session to be engaging and interactive. So please use the chat box to make comments, discuss what you hear. And there will also be a question and answer section right at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question, click on the question and answer, the Q&A section, and ask your question. We are also, I'm very excited to say this, joining everyone on Facebook Live. So if you're joining us on Facebook, you might not see a Q&A box. So please put your questions and your chat in the chat box on Facebook Live. So without further ado, let's start this session. We would like to begin the session with an interactive poll. So in our very, very first ever poll, we will be asking you all about today's topic, learner autonomy. In your lessons, how often do you spend time teaching learners how to be more independent in their learning? You might see a chat box, a poll box pop up on your screen if you're joining us on Zoom events. You can click on the options, one option, never, sometimes, often, and in every lesson. You've got 30 seconds to answer this question. Off you go. Now, if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you probably won't see a poll pop up, but you do have a chat box. So you can put your answer in the chat box. Is it never, sometimes, often, or in every lesson? Very soon, we'll see the answers to your question, how often most of you spend time teaching learners how to be more independent in their learning. How often do you spend time teaching learners how to be more independent in their learning? How do you teach them to be autonomous? What are the benefits of teaching learners to be independent? Now, I believe your 30 seconds will be up very, very soon. Let's have a look at how some of you are answering this poll. How much do you deal with learner autonomy and teaching learners to be independent? So using the chat box, if you can message us, tell me if you can see the results of the poll. And there you go. Interestingly, 38% of you say often, 33% coming close at sometimes, and 24%, well done, congratulations, in every lesson. Well, I always think we can do more with learner autonomy, but what can we do? What exactly can we do to help learners be independent? Let's find out more from our first speaker. We have a lightning talk and the format is really simple. The speaker will have 5 minutes to deliver her point. And the first speaker is Jane Chikapa. And Jane is a senior education officer, a teacher and a teacher educator from the Ministry of Education. She is the founder of Bloomers Initiative, which is nominated as a finalist for local innovation. And Bloomers Initiative publishes students' resources written by students. So without further ado, let's welcome Jane Chikapa on the topic of learner autonomy. Jane, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chia. I'm so excited that most of the people say they often they often use their time, or they make sure that the students are independent. So it's going to make my job easier. It will be just a matter of reminding each other on what we have to do, since most of the people do this often. But right now, I want us to go into the chat and try to define learner autonomy. What is learner autonomy? I can see answers popping in the chat box. Interesting. Some are saying allowing the learner to navigate, self-motivation, self-learning, exciting, independence in learning. Good, you're doing a good job. Yes, so basically, as we all have said, learner autonomy is the ability to take charge of the learner, to take charge of his or her own learning. So learner autonomy basically is allowing the learner to take charge of their own learning. Now, let's look at the importance of learner autonomy. First of all, learner autonomy fosters development of independent, proactive approach to studies. Believe you me, we all want learners who are going to develop, learners who are going to be independent, and learners who are going to be proactive. So if we are going to make the learners autonomous in their learning, it means there will be a proactive approach to studies, and it will be a bonus for us as teachers, because it will make our jobs easier, because we are teaching learners who are already proactive. Secondly, learners' autonomy enhances motivation, engagement, and it leads to increased skills and knowledge, hence increasing academic achievement. Believe you me, one of the things we would like to achieve at the end of the day is that our students achieve very well in the classroom. So if we foster learner autonomy in the classroom, the learners are going to be motivated. Believe you me, it becomes so exciting when you get into a classroom in which learners are engaged and they're very motivated. Thirdly, it leads to development of lifelong learning. At the end of the day, we want our learners to have lifelong learning. What are we talking about? For example, after they've grown into adults, we want them to be proactive, right? Those are the skills we like to instill in them. Self-regulation, innovation. We want to be instilling innovation in learners, and this can only be done through learner autonomy. Critical thinking, time management, goal setting, as well as decision-making skills when they become adults, or even when they're still young. So learner autonomy will help the learners quite a lot to achieve academically, as well as in the lifelong learning process when they become adults, or even when they are growing up. Moving on. I would like us to look at how we, the Bloomers Learning Initiative, have instilled learner autonomy in the learning process of our students. Believe you me, we've tested and we have seen that learner autonomy is possible. It is possible to instill independence in the learning of our students. As the Bloomers Initiative, we've provided autonomy for the learning environment. We've ensured that learning can take place anywhere, even outside the classroom. If you look at the pictures outside there, we've got learning taking place in the football pitch. Learners being instilled knowledge on our short stories in the football pitch. So it's possible to provide an autonomy in the learning environment. So if we're to foster learning autonomy and independence in a learner, let's let them choose even the environment in which they're going to do their learning. Or let's agree together with them the environment in which we're going to do our learning. Next slide. The other way in which we instill learner autonomy is providing clear objectives. we sit down with the learners. We come up with the objectives together. What are the objectives that we are going to learn? What is it what we want to learn about? In our initiative, the Bloomers Learning Initiative, we make sure that our objectives are SMART, specific, time-bound, and we instill this in the learners, and it is translated in the outcomes. Now, we also allow the learners to do their own way. We allow the learners to come up with their own objectives. For example, when they're coming up with the short stories, our initiative is all about creating short stories and publishing them with the learners. We allow them to come up with their own objectives. As they're doing this as students, it will translate as a lifelong lesson in the future. Next slide. As the Bloomers Initiative, you also encourage self-reflection. When you go into the classroom, we would like the learners to self-reflect. What have I learned? What am I about to learn? How can I apply the knowledge and skills that I've learned into the classroom or into the real world? So as the Bloomers Learning Initiative, we would like to encourage the learners to self-reflect, to self-retrospect, and come up with their own path at the end of the day, hence creating their abilities and skills. Next slide. Next one, please. The other thing that we do as the Bloomers Learning Initiative is ensuring that there is collaboration and peer learning. Believe you me, there is power in collaboration. United we stand. So we encourage the learners to collaborate, to work together, not to work in isolation. No one can achieve when they're working in isolation. So we encourage the learners to work together. And we also encourage peer teaching. After the learners have acquired knowledge, they can also replicate the knowledge and mentor others. So in the Bloomers Learning Initiative, we have the mentorship model in which learners mentor each other. They teach each other how to write short stories, and then later on the publication process. So at the end of the day, we are saying, let's encourage learner autonomy. It is possible and it is doable. Thank you, Chia.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was Jane Chikapa, who is a finalist for the ELTons Festival of Innovations for her product, Bloomers Initiative, that brings students to the forefront of the learning experience the way it should be. Now, before we introduce our next speaker, I have a second poll for you. Now, can we bring on the second poll? And here we would like to find out more about how we develop learners' critical thinking skills, because critical thinking is a very, very big part of learner autonomy. So do you develop your learners' critical thinking skills in your lessons? You have these options to pick from. What is critical thinking? It's not my job as an English language teacher. I get students to think more deeply about what they read or listen to. I get students to discuss or debate topics. I help students notice their assumptions and errors in thinking, or perhaps you have a different answer that you don't see as an option. You can click on other. If you're joining us on on Zoom events, please do use the poll pop-up and click the answer that's most relevant to you. If you're joining us on Facebook Live today, since we're streaming live, use the chat box and put your answer into the chat box. You have 30 seconds to write on the chat box or click on the poll. Your time starts now. And as we wait for your answers to come in, I would like to tell you a little bit about the next speaker. Now, we're asking about critical thinking because our next speaker, Andrew Boon, is an expert in critical thinking. And critical thinking seems to be a word, a phrase that comes up more and more often in the world of English language teaching. Previously, we might think, what has critical thinking got to do with language learning? But more and more, we're seeing the relevance of critical thinking to what we do and the skills that we're helping learners to develop as they begin to learn to use English out there in the real world. And I believe your 30 seconds will be up very, very soon. Have you answered the poll question? Yes, you have. And 69% of you say you get students to discuss and debate topics, a very common activity or task in the language learning classroom. Closely second is 58% saying I get students to think more deeply. So asking them more questions when they do a reading or a listening exercise. 5% of you was asking what is critical thinking, and I'm so glad you asked that question because Andrew is going to come up and tell us a bit more about critical thinking. And then we have 37% saying that they actually help students with cognitive errors in their thinking, especially in this age of false fake news. This is so very important. So let's bring on our second speaker, Andrew Boon. Andrew holds a PhD from Ashton University and has authored many ELT textbooks, graded readers, and research on methodology, motivation, and teacher development. Andrew is here today as a finalist for his book, Critical Thinking, which has been nominated in the category of Innovation in Teacher Resources. Andrew, you have 5 minutes for your talk on critical thinking. Your time starts now.
Okay, thank you very much, Chia, for a wonderful introduction. I'm going to be talking about critical thinking, which is ever so important in today's 21st century when we're exposed to so much information on a daily basis. My co-writer, Dr. Hadley, and myself developed a way of introducing critical thinking into the classroom. It's a 4-step cyclical process. In about 4.5 minutes, I'm going to explain this to you very, very quickly. Let's talk about developing dispositions. We want our students to begin to think critically, to understand critical thinking, to be aware of their own biases, their own preferences, and how that can affect the way that they interpret information. Going back to the Socratic method, we want them to question everything. Don't accept anything at face value. Be cautious before you accept something as truth. Search for evidence to support or refute the information. One of the activities that we introduce is called the Prove It. This is a very typical true or false game that we can play in our first lesson, but we add a layer of critical thinking to it. I'm going to do this very quickly. Please listen carefully and use the chat box. I'm going to give you 3 statements about myself. If you think they're true, write a T, and if you think they're false, write an F. Number 1, I speak English and Italian. Do you think that's true or false? True, false, true, true, true. Well, I live in Japan, so I speak English and Nihongo chotto dake. Number 2, I am married to an Indonesian. Do you think that's true or false? Some people are saying false, some people are saying true. It is true. My wife is Indonesian. And finally, number 3, I have written 43 graded readers for English language learners. Do you think that's true or false? Everyone's saying true or false. Great. Number 1 is false, number 2 is true, and number 3 is true. But where is the critical thinking? Now we need to think about the evidence that you would need to believe me. So let's go back to number 2. My wife is Indonesian. What evidence would you require to believe this? Please type in the chat box. Photos. I could show you photos. Passport. Marriage certificate, that's the one. Marriage certificate would be evidence, yeah? Okay, number 3, I have written 43 graded readers. What evidence would you require to believe me? Google Scholar. Could be, yeah. Good, search on Google, absolutely. When I did this with my students, my student went to Amazon and she went, I found your books on Amazon. The next stage of the cyclical process of critical thinking is to get our students to listen. We want to be able to listen, to understand, be curious about what someone else is saying, and to be respectful. All too often, we jump in with our own opinion before really listening. One of the activities in the critical thinking book is for student A to talk about what they did on the weekend. Student B just listens and draws a picture about what student A did. Afterwards, they compare. Is the picture correct? Did you listen to me? You may find that students actually start to interpret and put things into the picture that weren't really there. Step 3 of the cyclical process is reasoning. This is thinking about the strengths of other people's arguments. Are they a strong argument or a weak argument? Considering errors in reasoning and understanding the logical fallacies we use on a daily basis. One of the activities in the book is called Rank It. Here we have a situation, maybe your student is late with their assignment and they give you 4 reasons. The dog ate my assignment. Number 2, I was sick. Number 3, I was working and I didn't have time. And number 4, what assignment? Now you would need to then decide which is the strongest argument. And probably being sick is a really good argument, whereas my dog ate it is not such a good argument. Although I did see a YouTube video the other day where a young student's homework was eaten by her dog. So sometimes that can be truthful. In the final activity, in the final part of the cyclical process, it's about responding and restating to arguments and helping others to reach better conclusions. In this activity, we have the teacher making mistakes, and we encourage students to politely correct the teacher. For example, the teacher says the capital of Japan is Osaka, and then they have to go, sorry, actually, the capital of Japan is Tokyo. 5 minutes and 17 seconds. Arigato gozaimashita.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Andrew has given us some really practical, useful ideas that we can now take and use in our classroom the very next day. So thank you so much. And I've been really enjoying reading all your comments in the chat field. Muhammad Waban, you mentioned about using a game to encourage students to ask more questions. I think that is a wonderful way to promote critical thinking, to think, what questions can I ask? What can I think about more deeply? What can I explore? Thank you, Andrew, for telling us so much about critical thinking. Now, as you notice, time is tight. I hope you're enjoying the format of these lightning talks. The speakers only have 5 minutes to get their point through. And we're going to have our third and last speaker for this session coming up very soon to tell us a bit more about learner autonomy and learner independence. But before that, yes, you guessed it, there will be another poll. Now, let's have a look at this poll. In my class, I teach learning strategies. And how do you do that? By encouraging students to, here are your options, explore different ways of learning vocabulary, notice grammar patterns and deduce how these grammar patterns are used, confront their fears about learning, or practice using English outside the classroom. Or perhaps you have other learning strategies that you teach students that are not listed here, then you can click on the option Other. Again, reminder, if you are joining us live on Facebook Live, you will not have a pop-up on your screen for the poll, so just use the chat box to answer the questions. All right, here you go. Your 30 seconds to answer the poll starts now. How do you teach learning strategies? What are learning strategies? How do you encourage students to learn autonomously outside the classroom, perhaps? Perhaps you teach them different ways of learning vocabulary. Perhaps you don't lecture them on the grammar of the day, but instead get them to do the hard work, get them to notice the grammar patterns, and get them to figure out what the grammar patterns are used for. And the answers are in. We have 30% of you saying you help them to explore different ways of learning vocabulary, and another 30% tying with practice using English outside the class. Okay, and then 19% for noticing grammar patterns and confronting their fears about learning, and 2% with others. Now, remember, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us on Zoom events, do use the Q&A function to ask your questions. We will come to your questions after this last talk by Rachael Harris. So who is Rachael Harris? She is a very experienced foreign language, literature, and media studies teacher. And she's also a qualified SEN coordinator and is very passionate about discovering how all learners learn best. Rachael Harris is here today because her innovation, Ideas in Action, Activities for Developing Learning Strategies, has made it as a finalist for this year's category of Innovation in Teacher Resources. So, Rachael, are you ready? Your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, everybody. It's been fascinating listening to everybody else. I'd just like to add my take on empowering students, because like you all, I want to empower my students to be the best English speakers and the best learners that they can be. And that's what we all want. And that's why we're here watching this webinar and this whole conference today. Oh, sorry. So, like you, I didn't have enough time with my students to teach them everything I wanted to learn. And I wanted to be sure to teach them what was absolutely essential. And how can we know what's absolutely essential today when everything is changing so quickly? Also, I came across my students who, some students seem to get things really quickly, but others just don't. And I wanted a way of helping all of my students to learn the best they possibly can, including those with special education needs or those who learn differently. And so I came across this quote, which for me says everything about learner empowerment and why learning strategies are so important. The idea is that rather than spend our time teaching them the present perfect or some grammar point, the more time we can actually teaching them on how to learn will develop autonomous students. And then this is the key to their future success. They will be able to go on and learn anything, be it another language, be it English, or whatever it'll be for their future, where if we believe Mr. Elon Musk, the jobs we actually have now may not exist. So how do I do this? As Jane and Andrew have already mentioned, many things are important in teaching learning strategies before actually teaching the English, the grammar, the vocabulary, etc. And by teaching my students how to learn, I learned to give them the motivation they need to overcome difficulties. So what I love about this activity is it's very similar to Andrew's, but with a different take on it. Whereas Andrew's activity was, what do you believe about this? My activity, same idea, same thing, and obviously you can use them together, is all about difficult things I've done. And I ask my students to write 4 difficult things they've done. And similar to Andrew, one of them is not true. So in the chat box, if you could tell me which one you think is not true, and I'll let you in on it afterwards. Then, of course, I get my students to do this. But the idea is that they're showing difficult things they've done, and therefore, when they come to learning, because learning is difficult, they remember they can do it because they have done difficult things in the past. The difficult things I've done in the past are swim in Lake Geneva on Christmas Day, are running London Marathon, which I did 2 years ago, and on writing a book, which you can probably guess because I'm here now. And it's option 2, which I have never done, mainly because I'm scared of sharks, but also because I'm claustrophobic. So I don't think I could actually go diving. One of the other activities that we do in our class, oh, I seem to, is to look at people who have not succeeded straight away. Depending on the age of my students, when we look at this activity, one of the first things we have to do is say who everybody is. So if you could just pick somebody and tell us quickly about them in the chat, or if there's somebody you don't know, put their name in the chat with a question mark, and I will let you know who they are. But all of these people have one thing in common, and that is that at the beginning of their career, they failed. They didn't do what they planned to do. Oprah Winfrey lost her job as a news reporter. Mark Zuckerberg, as you probably know, had to leave school. Harrison Ford failed in his first acting jobs and was actually a carpenter when he got his big break. Colonel Harlan Sanders, famous for chicken, got his first job when he was 70. And we all remember that fail is first attempt in learning. I'm sorry, my slides won't move on. Could we have another way to learn about autonomy in vocabulary is to put in order the vocabulary ways, the ways of learning vocabulary. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time. So I will stop now and leave the questions for our panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. 5 minutes is tough, isn't it? But thank you for stopping on time. You're your talk was very interesting. It's got lots of wonderful ideas that I'm sure many people out there are trying to find out more about. So without further ado, let's bring on our entire panel. So the 3 speakers for today, Jane Chikapa, Andrew Boon, Rachael Harris, you've delivered your 5-minute lightning talk, and it's now time to engage all 3 of you in a discussion and with the audience as well. I've been seeing people from all over the world joining us. Some of you have joined us late. Welcome to the ELTons Festival of Innovation. This is our very first session of the day, and I'm very, very excited that we are starting on learner autonomy with these 3 experts, finalists of the ELTons, here with us today. Yes, absolutely. 5 minutes is not enough, says one of the people in the chat field. If you're joining us on Facebook Live and you have questions to ask, do put them in the chat field. We have people moderating Facebook Live. So let's have a quick look at our Q&A. We have one question here that some people have been answering. And I think one of the learning strategies, and Rachael, you probably can tell us more about this, is about formulating our own goals as learners. Why is this important, having students formulate their own learning goals, and how can we guide them to do this? Obviously, Rachael, I'm turning to you because your innovation that made it into the finals is all about learning strategies. But of course, Jane and Andrew, if you have answers to this question, please feel free to join in.
Well, Jane mentioned it when she talked about her SMART learning objectives. But first of all, before making objectives SMART, if we don't involve students in their learning process, then they don't feel that they have personal involvement, then they're not going to be motivated to learn something that's not important for them. That's why them choosing the objectives is so important. And then, as Jane said, making the objectives specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound will give the students something concrete to work towards.
Jane, would you like to come in on that and tell us a bit more about how you implement the SMART acronym, the SMART learning goals with your students?
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Chia. Yeah, it's all about planning together with the students, coming up with the objectives together with the students, and assuring them that the objectives are doable. And then later on, allow them to come up with their own. After we've created the objectives together, then they come up with their own, and then apply them in the real life situations like we do at the Bloomers Learning Initiative in the short story writing form.
That's actually, more important than we realize, helping students apply it, not just to the classroom, not just because it's homework, but because it actually applies to their real life situation. Mohammed has a question. I'm not sure if it's directed at Rachael or Jane, but he says, the ideas are wonderful, but what size are your classes? Let's start with Jane.
Oh, the size is very huge. I teach two classes. I've taught two classes, let me say. Well, for our initiative, we've got lesser students. We can have up to maybe 20 per session, but sometimes we can even go up to 500 for the initiative. We've had 500 before, but in the real classroom situation, we can go to one teacher up to 90 students. Yeah.
I just want to do this, 500 students. You've got a lot of respect for me, and I'm sure a lot from lots of people out there too. What about Rachael? What kind of sizes of classes are we talking about?
I feel that I teach in such a luxurious situation compared to Jane and other people. My class sizes vary a lot, and I would say the average is 20, goes up to 25, 30 perhaps.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew?
Yeah, I'm the same, 20, 25.
I wonder if the audience out there relates more to Rachael and Andrew's class sizes of 2025 or Jane's, larger numbers. I've got another really good question from Shaloni Akshita, sorry. How can we help learners to read fast at the same time, enhancing their critical thinking skills? So there are two parts to this question, right? Reading fast and enhancing critical thinking skills while reading novels or non-fiction books. Let's start with Andrew.
Well, I think, you've got to go back to basics and learn the fluency with extensive reading, learning at their own level, at a level that's appropriate to them. If you get a book which is way too advanced and above your proficiency, you're going to be stopping because you're not going to understand the words on the page. You need to understand about 90% of the words on the page. And then students will develop through graded readers up to a level of proficiency where they can start to read more advanced stuff. And then that comes into interplay as well. But if you're giving students material that's too high for them, then it's not going to help their critical thinking or their reading fluency. So, start low, start with the basic graded readers, have students reflect on them. What did they understand? What did they take away? There's non-fiction graded readers, which brings in the real world, and they can think critically about the information that's presented to them in the reader at their own level.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really interesting, and also kind of relates to Hafisa's question about whether critical thinking can determine the target language. And from what you're saying, if you choose the right level of reading and listening, then you can do both critical thinking while focusing on the reading and listening skill, but also the target language that comes up from it. Barbara has a really good question here. How different are learning strategies from young learners to adult learners? Presumably, we're assuming that the learning strategies we're teaching both groups, young learners and adult learners, are different. Rachael, do you have a comment on that?
I would say not necessarily so. Perhaps the way we go about teaching them learning strategies might be different. My experience has shown me that younger learners, teens, but also down to 7-year-olds, are more open to actually direct strategies. I am going to teach you how to learn your vocabulary. Whereas adults tend to think they know everything. Adults are not, it's harder for adults sometimes to learn because we've been going through life doing what we're good at. It's not all adults are learning every day, every week. So with adults, I am more indirect in my teaching. For example, the activity with the 4 different things that I've done, we would do it as an activity, but I wouldn't necessarily mention that we're doing this to show you that you can do hard things like when you do learning, like when you learn your English. It would just be an activity to practice the present perfect, for example. And the same with the fail activity. I would make more on the lives of the people, maybe do a presentation, their biographies, rather than this is a first attempt in learning, this shows you and this motivates you.
Thanks, Rachael. The time is ticking away. We've got 1 more minute. Jane, you've got lots of amazing comments about people saying hats off to you for teaching so many students. And there is a question about that. And with 500 students, how is it possible for you to cope with lesson objectives?
Okay, for the 500, I was talking of the sessions that we have as the Bloomers Learning Initiative, not the classroom session. But for the classroom session, like I said earlier on, it could be one. I've had 1 to 90. So we like Rachael said, it's all about coming up with strategies and outcomes that are going to be workable at the end of the day. For learners who are young, coming up with strategies which would make them excited, and they say variety is the spice of life, bringing more activities to the learners. For the wider or the elder audience, it will be all about giving them tasks in which they can work hands-on, like research, where they can explore themselves. So it's all about balancing at the end of the day. Yeah.
And you're very good at balancing. I mean, Felicia Mercedes Avalos says here, the larger the class, the less opportunities for students to participate. And I suppose in a way that can be true if you're delivering a top-down lecture style lesson. But I suppose the larger the class, the more you've got to give them tasks to work on their own in pairs and groups and encourage them to practice in that way. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I would sit here and chat with the three of you for another hour if possible. But thank you so much for participating in the British Council ELTons Festival of Innovation today. And thank you to our amazing audience out there. We've got an astounding 361 people on Zoom events and a lot more on Facebook Live participating today. Now, in a minute, if you're participating as an audience member, you will get a pop-up survey. Please take 2 minutes to share your thoughts. It will really help us because this is our first ever ELTons Festival delivered in such a way. We would love to get your feedback so that we can keep improving. Now, up next, don't miss our next session on online language teaching, a game changer for organizations, ? And this will be starting very shortly. So to join the next session, head back to the festival lobby. Now, if you are wondering what I'm talking about, perhaps you're on Facebook Live, do go on to the British Council ELTons Festival page or just search online for British Council ELTons Festival and you will see the program of today that you can join and perhaps register for them. And hopefully I'll see you at a later session today. So don't forget, the next session is online language learning, a game changer for organizations, ? And I hope you've enjoyed the session today. Thank you so much for coming.